SABC News ibisonga yokina umsajisia ikatsera makuru kaparaparepe ngaruzeni kamushi
Njeriwa Johnson echipise Mr. Lavalava for them lovers. Chipinga zvinondi warefuna uviri vatichereseni masiyadi. Minister Zompekasi Dogotera Kofofienzo Rampopa vari lino
They were delicious.
Oh my God, that Pooe. Oh, I want to my house and that Pooe. Fresh.
One, two, one, two, one, two. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the OR Tambo School of Leadership Public Dialogues. My name is Kifet Omkari, and today I'll be facilitating the session. Today we'll be talking about the ANC 2019 Elections Manifesto Review. This is the first segment of the review series that we're going to have. So our guests today are going to be Comrade Dineo, Majavu, then Comrade David Maimela, as well as Dr. Pooe. So this dialogue or this review is a part of a series of dialogues hosted by the OR Tambo School of Leadership in order to enhance political education for members of the African National Congress, the broader mass democratic movement, as well as the public, deepen the democratic project. So we'll be having these dialogues as we used to have Umkhabulo dialogues. You would notice that they have changed to OR Tambo School of Leadership Public Dialogues. And that is mainly to ensure that as we have these dialogues, we don't leave anyone behind, but we're able to attract various members of society from all sectors of society. And the other thing is that these dialogues are going to take different forms. We'll have dialogues such as these ones, but we'll also have dialogues in a form of public lectures, public seminars, which will be hosted physically or in an hybrid manner. So this is just part of the dialogues that we'll be hosting as the OR Tambo School. So without any waste of time, comrades, having welcomed you, thank you so much for coming on the platform. Even those who are joining us on Facebook, thank you very much for joining in. Without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Perhaps before I go there, it's important just to highlight what are the key discussion points in today's conversation. So as an agenda setting for a series of the manifesto review that we're going to have from today, and probably we'll have about 4 to 5 more sessions of this review looking at the thematic areas of the manifesto itself. You would know that the 2019 manifesto had 7 priorities within it, and would want to then go deeper and assess each of those priorities. So today is just an agenda setting, and the key discussion points will be: to what extent has the ANC fulfilled its promises as outlined in its 2019 elections manifesto? Which areas of the manifesto has the ANC done exceptionally well? And which areas does it need to improve? And lastly, going into 2024 national elections, what are the key issues that the ANC should emphasize in its election manifesto? So these are the key discussion points that we'll be discussing. So, comrades and friends, I'll introduce our first speaker for today. And her name is Comrade Dineo Majavu. And I'll just read her bio shortly so that we are on her on who she is and the kind of work that she does. So Dineo Sipone Majavu is a Marxist, Leninist feminist, an internationalist and activist. He served as the South African Communist Party district deputy chairperson. She also serves as the Young Communist League of South Africa on the Young Communist League of South Africa National Committee. She's also the spokesperson of the YCN. She's also the chairperson of the ANC in what is performed in Greater Johannesburg. He has worked as an international relations officer at Majavu, and she's currently the program manager at FES Trade Union Competence Center in Sub-Saharan Africa. She's currently a board member of the Joburg Pickup and chair of the Comrades, please mute yourself. Sorry about that, comrades. She's currently a board member of the Joburg Pickup and the chairperson of Sizo Foundation. So without any further ado, comrades, I'll give it over to Comrade Dineo to give us her input. And then after that, she'll be followed by Comrade David. And then after Comrade David, we'll have TK. Then after these inputs, we're going to have a general discussion. And before we get into that general discussion, there are some ground rules that I would lay. But just to prepare comrades. When we're going to have a general discussion, it's going to be important that your device is named accordingly. So, for example, when I see someone here, their device is saying Samsung SMA14. Such a person will not be allowed to speak up until they change their device name to an actual name that we can recognize. And when you give input, you'll be required to put on your video. So without any further ado, comrades, Comrade Dineo. I hope she's not struggling with network. Comrade Dineo. Struggling to get Comrade Dineo here. I hope she's not struggling with network. Okay, in the interest of time, because it seems like Comrade Dineo is struggling with network, we'll move on to Comrade David Maimela, and then we'll come back to Comrade Dineo after Comrade David's input. So just to read Comrade David's bio, so that we're at par with who he is. Comrade David Maimela is the founder and executive director of Policy Space, a public policy think tank and consulting firm based in Gauteng, South Africa. His academic and training has earned him a career in public policy, political analysis, international relations, and foreign policy. He's currently serving South Africa as a non-executive director of the South African Broadcasting Corporation, that is the SABC, Gauteng Growth and Development Agency, a council member of the University of Limpopo, amongst other governance structures in the public sector. He holds a master's cum laude in politics, specializing in international relations. David is also an alumnus of a highly recommended African program on rethinking economic development. David often writes for popular mediums and gives commentary on various television and radio platforms in South Africa. His research interests are on international relations, foreign policy, African politics, political economy, development, national security, education, and the youth. In short, Comrade David is a political analyst, an activist, an academic, and an author. So I would like to give it to Comrade David
Good afternoon, comrades and friends. I don't know if you're able to hear me.
If you're able to hear me.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Hey, there's connectivity issues, I think, everywhere. I think
Yes, we can hear you, Comrade David.
I think it's largely due to load shedding. We are struggling, but I'll try to be as audible as possible. First of all, thanks to the Oliver Tambo Political School for inviting us to basically reflect on the manifesto of the ANC insofar as the last 5 years are concerned. I often prefer to, sort of lay out what I actually am going to use as a framework to make my remarks. The first point of reference for me is that I often prefer to take a long-term view about political and economic trends in our country. And so you will realize that my comments will actually reflect a much longer period going backwards and a much longer period going forward. Because I actually do think that many countries and many political parties, either in government or outside government, that actually take themselves seriously, they have to think long term, and they always have to go back to the long term strategy and the long term vision. So that is basically one of my. Then the second part of it is that I think my main focus will be on the political economy, because I think that's more or less the area that the manifesto or the ANC needs to sort of work on, significantly. And then, of course, I think the last area will be around what I think about the political model, the political system, as well as the political processes that actually have a serious bearing on the ability of the ANC or any governing party for that matter to be able to transform our society and change the lives of our people. So that for me would be the kind of framework that I'll be using. To start off with, I think that there are two important, if not three important documents in the case of South Africa. Or let me start off by saying that I think that the ANC in the past 30 years has done exceptionally well in terms of a number of areas. The establishment of our democratic order and our constitutional order is actually an immense achievement and an immense contribution from the ANC, right? And secondly, I think on the basis of that, our constitutional order, which lays out the principle and the institution of the rule of law, we have established very strong and sustainable public institutions, whether you look at the institutions in the judiciary, Chapter 9 institutions, the public service, which is constantly being transformed and reformed from time to time, with the recent intervention being on deepening. I always want to quote it properly, deepening the professionalization of the public service. And then whether you look at a number of public entities that have been established that continue to succeed, and of course those that are facing serious challenges. And then I also do think that by and large, the lives that South Africans are living at the moment is actually far much better than under apartheid in many regards. Although in the last 10 years, in the period between 2009 and 2020, in the decade of the period after 2010, the statistics South Africa has indicated that poverty has worsened in the country. But I do think that if you look at, I know there's a huge debate about whether we have a middle class in South Africa, what type of, particularly the Black middle class, what type of Black middle class do we have, whether it is actually a real, Black middle class or just simply a paper middle class. I think those are some of the achievements of the ANC, and what has come to be important to underline in that, for instance, the inclusion or the mobility of a number of Black people that have been in the margins of society to enter the ranks of the middle class is the fact that at the same time there has been a growth of inequality within Black people and between white and Black people, and that also then constitutes a very serious area of work for the ANC in terms of the social fissures and the tensions that actually arise in our society. As we speak now, because of the big area that I'm going to be talking about, which is the economy, because of the performance of the economy, that middle class is actually either dying, shrinking, or actually facing serious pressures in terms of income and sustainability, and actually the cost of living. And that actually cuts across all strata of society. The poor and the working class are actually far much worse off, but the middle class itself finds itself quite in a serious, precarious situation. And the ANC has got to be mindful of that. And if you look at the electoral trends of 2014, 2016, and 2019, as well as 2021, you will realize that in the metros or the so-called urban centers, the vote of the so-called Black middle class has become very, highly contested, and the ANC has found itself actually, on the wrong side of the law insofar as that group of voters is concerned. So it's got to actually tackle that area. It's got to deal with that area. But you see, fundamentally, and this is where I'm going to stop at so that I allow the other panelists to come in. I actually do think that the one area where the ANC has to focus on strongly and was meant to focus on strongly is actually in the transformation of our economy. Because without a radical reallocation of our resources in this country, there can be no sustainable democracy, there can be no peace, and there can be no coexistence, right? So if you do not address that, then you have a problem. And then coming back to the 2 or 3 documents that I spoke about, I think for me, the most fundamental documents that actually tried to make a serious intervention on the economic development trajectory of our country was actually the reconstruction and development program that we had, which I believe is still the policy of the ANC and the policy of government, right? That's secondly, then it's the National Development Plan, which is basically a plan about any and everything, right? Many countries have got similar plans, and they're about any and everything. Then the other key important document is actually one that was actually written in 1998, the document of the alliance called State Property Relations and Social Transformation. That document actually, we've got to revisit that document from time to time, because it is in that document that the ANC actually articulates, or rather the alliance actually articulates how it actually intends to go about transforming the economy of South Africa in favor of the majority. Because remember, in 1994, we actually got into office with a platform that says a better life for all. Kinako, people must vote the ANC. And people overwhelmingly did that on the basis that the ANC will use the levers of state power to actually transform the economy and make sure that we do not only have inclusion, a concept that has originated in the World Economic Forum in the early 2000s. We do not talk about economic inclusion, but we actually are talking about radical economic transformation, right? That will actually change property relations, change social relations, and make sure that fundamentally the Black majority, Africans in particular, and the poor and the working class are actually part of the mainstream of the economy. And when I actually spoke in the review last week on Saturday, I actually underscored this, that you have to, in terms of your strategy, your ideology, your policy, and in terms of your rhetoric, actually, you've got to go back to define what you actually think is the fundamental problem in South Africa and what you think is the solution, or in other words, what is the South African dream, right? And if you go back to 1912 or the period before 1912, you will find that you actually get the answer there. Because fundamentally, it's about what? Land dispossession. It's about what? The franchise. It's about what? It's about the economy, etc. But the franchise has been achieved largely, but it then remains debatable as to whether can you continue to have a peaceful, developmental and sustainable democracy, which only offers at its best, only the franchise without the social content that is necessary to actually keep that democracy going. And the answer to that question is very clear, that you can't. So you've got to, so the issue for me is that if you are to measure the progress that we're making, is whether the actual core outcomes that we actually are working on are actually being achievable and are actually being achieved. And if you do not see those actually changing, then it means that democracy itself is in danger. It means that our country itself is in danger, because then you are actually, building, you're actually putting the seeds for counter-revolution. You're putting the seeds to actually defeat, the victory and the breakthrough that you have achieved back in 1994 to make sure that is that franchise. So the franchise is actually very empty. The franchise is very empty if it does not translate into, real, social outcomes that actually improve the quality of life of our people. And that takes us back to the idea of a better life for all. And by the way, the idea of a better life for all is not only found in South Africa, but it's found in various other countries in the global South. And because it's quite an enduring and quite a very correct, a progressive perspective. I'll leave it there for now, and then we will probably engage as we go forward.
Thank you very much, Comrade David, for those insightful contributions you've made. Also, thank you very much for the references you've given. The documents that we. In fact, I'll ask a favor from you. If you could please just write the names of those documents in the chat group so that the comrades can go and engage those documents as we review 2019 ANC Manifesto. So without further ado, comrades, I will go to Comrade Dineo. I've already introduced Comrade Dineo. We just had an issue with network. So I will go to her to give her inputs. And from here, we'll so that we can have ample time for discussion. Now, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kameke. Thanks. I want to keep my video off just for issues of bandwidth. I'm just using a different device that I was using earlier due to load shedding. So my apologies, colleagues, but can I just please switch off my camera for now, if that's okay? Is that all right? That's it.
Yes, you.
Right.
Yes, okay. You can proceed with your camera off.
All right. Thank you very much. I think very similar to what Comrade David was saying, just really an appreciation of having this discussion. I think it's really an important discussion. I think it comes at a crucial time. I do think maybe we delayed this discussion for too late, especially before the national elections. But I mean, we should have probably started it in the beginning of the year. However, we are very grateful to form part of a discussion that will be happening, a series of discussions that will be happening. I also had the privilege of being part of the manifesto review last weekend in Dobsonville. So, I mean, I think some things the president spoke about, and I will mention them because I fully agree with some of the things that he mentioned. Because, we are looking at this manifesto review after certain things happened within our country and within the world that, of course, affected the implementation of it fully. But we also aware that, the SG was saying that 70% have been fulfilled. And I think the crux of what I'm going to say is that even though we've had the 70% fulfilled, even though we can say that we can tick boxes of, yes, we've done A, B, C, and Z in light of the manifesto, I think the issue has been the quality of what has been done, one. Two is whether, like Comrade David was saying, the political economy or the economic posturing of the ANC and how that has affected the implementation that would be, in the same manner that we would have liked to be in terms of the manifesto. Three, I think it's important as we're thinking about this to consider the fact that did it really fulfill? Were we able to speak about our gains in a way that was appealing to people, not even just appealing to people, but in a way that made sense to people? Because I feel there was a disjuncture with our implementation of the manifesto, with what people's needs were immediately, but also whether they understood exactly what we were doing and where we were going with regards to it. And I think those are important things. The issue about policy or manifesto implementation is that it's not something that you just do in the beginning or at the end. It's something that we continuously should be checking and discussing to ensure we're always in the right space. And I guess that's why ANC branches are there. But I think it's important to just mention that, of course, there was the impact of COVID-19, which, of course, refocused and possibly reprioritized certain areas. But also to a certain degree, more than anything else, I think it undermines some of the gains or the very critical components of what the manifesto in 2019 had written about. Of course, we'll get into more detail about it. And I think also that there is a need also to speak about manifesto and look at how our relations as the ANC, the MDM, and our community links have been happening. I mean, when we're having public meetings, etc., to what extent, how are we able to have the conversations that we really need to have? And I guess to a certain degree, when we look at some of the manifesto launches as well that were happening of other parties, political parties, especially post 2019, where there's been a lot of coalitions, even though we're not looking at coalition what maybe did we miss out on, what were maybe some of the critical things that we need to look at. Okay, so in light of that, that was just an opening. I think we've done very well in terms of, you know, doing the things that we said we do with regards to welfare states, healthcare to a certain degree, of course. And like I said, it's about the extent that we've done what we've done, right? So when we speak about the security and comfort for all, we have, you know, social security that's there. We've had some, you know, great opportunities with regards to housing from flips, you know, it's no longer flips, but from all of these policies that have come to allow many people to have access to health, social housing. You know, we're increasing issues of public transport. In terms of building safer communities, we've had a number of instances where we've increased the police, and I mean, in Gauteng in particular, and I'm Gauteng based, so please understand the bias. We've had the CRAM, we've had different organizations coming and participating in this in terms of the just transition and or energy transition, or we've had a number of communications. We've all the presidential committees that we said that we'd have been created. They have been releasing frameworks and having discussion, whether it's the digital economy one or the, you know, climate change, with regards to building a capable government. We've seen stronger, you know, discussions and institutionalization and the finalization. I mean, whether they were efficient or not, I mean, that's the other conversation about it. On building, on dealing with corruption, on dealing with promoting integrity. Of course, with regards to, you know, having also, I mean, LGBTI, the Tutuzela centers have been open. So these things have happened and they exist, you know. But the one thing I think we definitely need to speak about is how, one, with regards to unemployment, ANC policies, our economic policies from GIA, from us GISA, and now has been specifically about trying to deal with unemployment and inequality in our country. But we've seen a huge increase in this. Regardless of what we've been doing, we've seen a huge increase in unemployment, huge increase in inequality, and I think that's because one of the reasons why is because we don't realize the impacts of unemployment. And I think you know, intellectuals have been speaking about structural unemployment, which has come into a point where people have been unemployed for over a year and they're no longer, you know, willing to look for a job as much as they didn't. Once you do that, of course, structurally, you become part of the unemployed. It's difficult for you to enter into the employment spaces, and we don't deal with such things. So even when we come up with employment opportunities, we don't understand the impacts of structural unemployment. That's the one thing. Two is that we are not necessarily having a dignified social protection. That means that we are giving people money, we're giving welfare, we're giving pensions, but in a sense also maintaining the very increased unemployment and unequal ways of doing things. So you have ShopRite that will be there, that will take the very money from the people and not necessarily give back to the communities that it's based in. And all of these are very critical questions that for me, it's about our neoliberal policies and whether they are effective enough to implement the manifesto that we have. Also, I think we have a very skewed idea of labor. And I mean, when we think about labor, when we think about work within our country, we have been systematically disarming labor and disarming organized labor in particular, to an extent that we're including more of civil society organizations in our things, but excluding labor from the discussions of policy and implementation within our country. But our country particularly has had labor being critical to discussion, being critical to implementation, being critical even to industrial policies within our countries. So, I mean, this very clear undermining of collective bargaining, very clear increase of precarity, and I mean, this idea that we one of the things that the manifesto speaks about is that we're going to implement that workers, what you need, if the experience is decreased, but also you are only your probation is lessened and stuff like that, but we haven't been able to enforce that. We still have people that are on probation for 1 year, 2 years, basically being contract workers and being increased in precarity. We have organizations such as Woolworths who don't have many formalized tellers and things like that. So we are putting people in precarity, but we are also ensuring that getting into the job is difficult, and we're not enforcing the laws that we want to enforce. Lastly, we're also agreeing, I mean, we said we're going to raise 1.2 trillion. Instead of raising money in terms of investments, we are getting into loans that are really not doing what we want them to. If, you know, for the JETIP, for instance, which is still under discussions, we taking more loans as opposed to investments. We are going the wrong direction. We're not doing exactly what we want to do. We are putting workers, one, in a very difficult position. We're not prioritizing upskilling and reskilling of workers as we look at a digitized world, as we look at a society that is founded on, that has low carbon emissions, and we have renewable energy. Once we're thinking about these things, we're not thinking about how the impacts on communities. We're not thinking about the impacts on society as well. And I think for me, this just has 3 reflections for me that I think are critical, that maybe as we discuss today, as we're looking at the manifesto, maybe even though we've implemented what we said we would implement, the quality has been away from what we wanted it to be. And why is this? And I think maybe we need to understand, as we go forward, really assess whether this neoliberal economy is working for the mass of the people. That's the first thing. Are we aiming, and I know Comrade David speaks about how there's this professionalization of the public service, but I mean, even though we are saying that there's a professionalization, is there a really holding that, you know, constitutionally, when you are involved in public service, you must implement the laws that are there? Are we being very forceful about that, one, but also really protecting the rights of workers in the same space? 2, are we including workers in the discussion of the kind of changes that we want to have for the implementation of the manifesto to be correct? And are we then also really privatizing public services? What I mean by this is relegating the services that government, that municipalities are supposed to be in charge of, to private companies. And we're seeing a lot of this happen where instead of the city owning and having the enough capacity to implement what it has to implement in terms of safety, in terms of providing renewable energy and things like that, in terms of providing the necessary services, we're finding that being more privatized. How do we work around not doing this? But also, how is it important that the ANC reconfigures the alliance? So all alliance proponents are very critical in the manifesto building, in the engagement of it, so that everybody is there to ensure that the ANC's manifesto does not put people before profits. And I'm taking this from the party because I'm from the party. It is important that the manifesto does not do that, but also the implementation in particular does not put profits before people. I think this is just really broad because we can go in depth about what we are doing and what we're not doing, but we definitely need to do better. Just recently, emphasise is there, yes, and it's a great initiative that we've done. We've given more funding, we've been able to succeed. We stabilized even during COVID-19, but now there's challenges within the implementation, the consistency of the implementation of the manifesto. Do we only look at it towards the last manifesto? And the manifesto, of course, review should not be a one-step thing. I think it should regularly happen outside of the NGCA. I'll stop right there, sorry, without taking time of the other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Dineo, for those inputs. Indeed, you are a communist and you're very passionate about the labor movement, you know. But I think what came out strongly is the emphasis on the need for economic transformation. And this makes sense because when you look at the 7 priorities that are in the 2019 election manifesto, priority number 1, which speaks to economic transformation, you know, it says transform the economy to serve the people, makes up 46% of the commitments that the ANC made, which amounts to 102 commitments out of all the 222 commitments that the ANC has made. 46% of those are on the issue of economic transformation, which means it's a very serious matter that we need to attend to. But without wasting time, I'll go on to introduce Dr. Pooe so that he can also give us his inputs. Then we'll get to discussions. Dr. Pooe currently works at the Witwatersrand School of Governance, teaching, supervising, and leading projects, looking into state-owned entities, institutional analysis, development, and scenario planning. Before joining the Wits School of Governance, he worked with various other institutions of higher learning like the Northwest University, University of KwaZulu-Natal, and the Gordon Institute of Business Science. Joining academia on a full-time basis, he worked as a policy research consultant at the Gauteng Provincial Legislature, the Sidibeng District Municipality, in the Integrated Development Planning Unit. Over the last 7 years, he has led various research and teaching projects focusing on a diverse set of problems like illicit financial flows in the mining sector, how government in the Republics of Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, and Zimbabwe institutions address the problem for development purposes. In addition to this, he has worked on scenario planning projects looking to assist the South African and several South African governments on business handling sorry, let me read that again. In addition to this, he has worked on scenario planning projects looking to assist the South African and several Southern African governments in business handling of future thinking, planning in the mining, energy, and business sector. In 2019, he was awarded a fellowship for the Managing Global Governance at the DAS German Institute of Development and Sustainability, while in 2021, he worked with the Presidential State-Owned Enterprises Council via the Department of Public Enterprises, representing the Wits School of Government. Lead is the head of the Secretariat. As of 2023, he heads the Wits School of Governance SOE Energy Transition Consortium Group, focusing and providing complex policy advice to the public, private, and interested parties. So that is who Dr. Pooe is. And with that,
good afternoon, Chair. Am I audible?
yeah, am I audible? Yes, you are.
Yeah, I should have probably asked you ahead of time if you can just allow me to share my screen. Unfortunately, I'm a victim of the profession I work with, that we always want people to see what we're going to say. So sorry, I should have given you a heads up about that.
You can go ahead and share.
Okay, no, that's perfect. Then let me just share this one. All right, okay, let's see what we're going to share. All right, is the screen visible?
The screen.
Okay. Chair, is it the presentation visible?
Yes, it is ticking.
All right. No, I promise not to go through each and every slide. The key thing I really did want to just maybe go over, it's just that to really kind of contextualize how I'm going to put this together. And I think sometimes it's better if you can kind of critique one's input based on what you've seen, as opposed to sometimes what you hear, because I know I've got a habit of speaking rather quite quickly. Like the other two presenters, I'll say a very big thank you for the invite, which was extended. Let me just turn off my screen. Yeah, to the other presenters, it really is an honor to be able to come present to the school. And look, I hope one is able to make the types of presentations which do assist in the process being taken, and most importantly, one is adding value to the idea of policy within the ANC and also within greater society. In looking at I think at the manifesto, and Chair, you'll forgive me for taking liberties in terms of how I interpreted what you expected of us. I think you can take me to task afterwards, because you'll see I probably extended my mandate a bit much there. But I just wanted to really put it to it, is it a revision or a precursor? Because looking at the 2019 manifesto, and even what was presented last week, it leaves one in a bit of a quandary in terms of how do you actually interpret it. And as such, I think 5 things really came to mind when I was doing the revision. One is the idea of scope and precision, which I'll explain later on. The idea of measuring and counting. The quirk or the pressure of incumbency. And I think the reality that it might not be a developmental state, but rather an undevelopmental state, and the problematic issue of path dependency. And looking at 2 particular years, 2008 and 2019, which I think have sort of colored the 2 previous presenters' discussions as well. And then there's also the idea, which, and I think I'm a big proponent of, especially if you do policy work, that I think, look, it's one thing to highlight problems or what has not been done, but there's also an onus to say, look, if this could have been done differently using the revision, what should the 2024 manifesto look like? So I'll be a bit brave in kind of putting it out there that I think one has actually kind of put together what then a 2024 manifesto for the ANC should look like based on the current manifesto. Well, look, I don't want to go through each and every part of the 7 points of it, but there is a question when you do read the manifesto revision, the document which was released last week. Look, I think everybody knows the transforming the economy to serve all people and the like, advancing transformation. But then obviously you go deep, a layer down to find out exactly what does this actually mean in the greater scope. Well, they speak about creating jobs, better jobs for the first one, the economy, the size. Now for me, this is where the problem starts to really start to manifest itself. Because in terms of the scope, I won't fault the manifesto for 2019 for the scope of problems it emphasized, but I think the problem comes in the precision. And by that I mean everybody knows. I think it's a historical fact now. It's no longer a debated fact that South Africa has an economy which is not working. This is not a 2019 phenomenon. This goes back to 2014. And one might argue that the boat was missed after the 2008 financial crisis to really almost, dare I say, revisit and respoke what the economy is supposed to look like. But when you read the manifesto, one thing that really does come out from the scopes 1 to 7 is the lack of precision that goes into it. And by that, I mean, it's one thing to say youth and children are under 25 account for 40, because that's a known fact. I think what is missing in terms of when you speak about precision was the question of, the problem, so what? What comes next? And when you read the manifesto in its 2019 raw fact, and then what presented last week, you never really go beyond the scope. And that really, for me, is the problem of scope and precision, which is, it's one thing to scope what the problem is. It's another thing to come up with something precise, which actually goes to the heart of saying, understanding that the ANC knows what the problem is, this is a solution. And I think this can kind of bring us to a bit of a problematic understanding of the 2019 manifesto, which is to say, I think in what was hopeful was that it would be a break from the past. And I think we couldn't shy away from what the past was about, and to kind of say, listen, we're going into the 2019 in this 5-year period to try to do something new. But the problem with trying to do something new without giving proper precision and historical context is that you basically risk, apologies for that, you risk having to explain, or you risk missing a large populace to be able to answer the question, what have you been doing in the meantime? Because I always make that point when I critique ANC policy is the ANC is unique in that, look, yes, it has great internal democracy, which is to know every 5 to 10 years a president will come in, his or her team will come in and out. That's a good thing, it's a positive. However, it is one unitary party at the end of the day, and it has been the governing party for what will be 3 decades going into 2024. So you shouldn't really have a huge disjuncture between a manifesto from one political party. It's almost as though there's a schism between X individual coming in and a Y individual coming out. And that's a bit of a problem. And this really manifests itself quite clearly in the 2019 manifesto, where while the scope is there and it's historical in how the ANC looks at things, the precision of answering the problems is really missing. And I always like saying this by way of example, because it's one thing to say, TK, you've said, what do you mean by scope and precision? Well, the most successful political party in a democratic state over the last, one might say, 100 years is the British Conservative Party. It's not about whether you like them or not. That's a by the way point. But this is what their manifesto looks like in basically the first pledges, right? To lead the European Union, and goes on and on and on. But by scope and precision, you can understand that they have scoped what they want to do in its, as David puts it, in its theoretical understanding. The British Conservative Party has always been an anti-EU party, right? So the precision that would come out from having that theoretical underpinning would be that obviously they want to leave the EU. But what I think is most important is when you get down to the numbers, right? Which is to say 50,000 nurses, and they go on and on and on, things like that. Well, in the review process that came up, because as you know, the British Conservative Party has many think tanks, as I would assume that the OR Tambo institution is also trying to be, it's to say, okay, how well did they do? And this is, as I think the previous speaker put it, it's on a yearly basis where they check, you've said this is your manifesto, you've said that you want to do things such as leave the EU, you want to put about 50,000 nurses, you want to put about a few more doctors in. What does that look like? And you see the pledge, the rating, and the analysis. When you read the 2019 manifesto, that's really missing. And it brings me to this point, which is the measuring and counting. I understand that the General Secretary gave a percentage of what has been done, but when you read, as I said, the actual document from 2019 to the document that was presented last week, there is a huge problem in terms of where do the numbers begin? Because it's one thing to say, look, we've achieved 70%, we've achieved 46% in these 7 areas. What I want to know, and I think what most citizens want to know, is tell me the basis, the genesis of your numbering, of how you achieve that. And when I read the 2019 document, even in the review, it really does make it hard for one to really assess what is success and what is failure. If anything, I would say that the document does itself a disservice by not explaining exactly to the T, when do you start assessing what the 2019 was supposed to do vis-a-vis the ANC being in party for the last 3 decades. And because that is absent, it actually leaves a document open to interpretation, and interpretation will tend to be more negative in the sense that it'll be saying, well, look, okay, you say there's 102. Well, is this 102 based on actual policy facts? Or is it 102 based on, for instance, when it speaks about transforming the economy, they speak about, look, we've increased certain, I think the social grant thing, which was in relation to COVID. Well, that was not what was promised in the 2019. So how do you justify having such an inclusion in your actual document for review when COVID was something which was not planned for? So I think that really does leave that for me is a key issue with the document, the scope and precision, the measuring and the counting. And I make the argument, this is really does go down to the fact that the document, this is, I think, a key critical point. And I think David sort of touched on, which is to say, one might say it's ahistorical in what it tries to do. In looking at this, what I tried to do is I went back to the 2014, and I also went back to the 2009 manifesto to say, listen, if I am being unfair in critiquing the 2019 document, saying it's ahistorical and it's very hard to measure what is success or not, based on the fact that they don't give you what's termed a basis of numbers and monitoring and evaluation, or a baseline. Maybe the fault is with me that I don't understand the history of manifestos of the ANC. So I try to say, look, let me just look at how the ANC understands itself when it comes to this. The 2019 document vis-a-vis the 2014. Why the 2014 is, if you go to page 5 of the 2014 manifesto, it says, ANC 2014 manifesto, in the next 5 years, we will build on the progress made in implementing our 2009 manifesto priorities, which were creation of more jobs, decent work, sustainable livelihoods, inclusive growth, rural development, land reform, food security, education, health, and fighting crime. So it was 5 priorities then. 2019 went to number 7. Now, one might say, look, and I think it's correct to say, look, there was some, how do I put it? Certain of the priorities from the 2014 were extended into the 2019, and that is fair, but I think it does itself a disservice. For instance, and I think we can all agree that the 2014 and 2019, on the first key priority of transforming the economy, look, I think they basically say almost the same thing, which is while the 2019 says transforming the economy, the 2014 says creation of more jobs, decent work, and sustainable livelihood. So it's not 100% fixed, but it's acceptable. Now you go to the second point, advancing social transformation. Now, one might say social transformation belongs in another segment of the document for 2014. That is fair, but in 2014, the second key priority was rural development, land reform. And this is missing in the 2019 document as a standalone feature. Stepping up, fight against corruption, it goes on, that's fine. Then obviously it goes building a safer communities, building, renewing. So what I'm trying to really highlight here is there is a bit of a disjuncture between how the ANC saw itself in 2014 and how it sees itself in 2019. I'd actually make the argument, the 2014 document, because it references the 2009 document, which gives one the ability to be able to then go into the numbers, even use documents such as a 25-year review, to be able to say, okay, listen, did the ANC really do well in government? Can I actually match the numbers of poverty? Can I match the numbers of inequality over a longer period than simply saying 2019? So if I then look at it in that way, what does then come to the fore is to say the 2019, for me, manifesto, we shouldn't then be surprised that you get this, which is, it's very hard to measure and quantify whether it's a success or not. If anything, owing to the nature of where the South African economy is, one would lead to the fact that it is a lot of, I think, has been missed. And one might have to say some has been outright failures in the 2019 document, only because, as I said, we are not given a basis for how you can measure it outside of the year 2019. Which then brings me to the point I really do want to put across, which is, if I then read the 2019 document, it really is not much of a surprise, because I think the ANC has been battling with this idea for the longest of time, which is, and David spoke about having a theoretical framework for how you analyze it. And you can kind of see the schism quite clearly in the 2014, from 2000s to the 2019 document. In the early documents, 2000 to even 2019, but I'll probably say let's stop at 2018, the ANC for the longest speaks about being a democratic developmental state. And then a new jargon comes into the being, which is to say a capable developmental state. At the end of the day, what it really does say to me, looking at both manifestos, is that the ANC has, one, misunderstood the idea of what a developmental state is, and two, does need to move away from the idea of trying to project itself as a developmental state, because I think it creates more issues for itself than it ought to be. And this is not just my critique of it. Dr. David Mohale, who's based at the Durban University of Technology and is a noted local government scholar, and also I think an ANC, one might say an ANC intellectual in his own right, actually says the developmental states are often distinguished from others by their structures, roles, outcomes. The structures and roles are developmental in our course for soaring outcomes. And if this is the sole criteria for which we actually measure what a developmental state is, then we always have to go to the first priority, what a developmental state is. It's not about being democratic, it's not about even being capable, because the capability is inherently part of what it means to be a developmental state. But it's about addressing the major issues of the day, which is unemployment. And when you look at the statistics for South Africa 2002, and I don't have to go over this because I think both speakers have touched on it, that, look, it's been a catastrophic failure when it comes to the employment creation in this country. And if you accept my hypothesis that one of the key reasons why the 2019 document is hard to measure is that you can kind of see there's a schism in an understanding of its efficacy, one, and what it really means. We then have to start looking at other things that really make it a bit hard to kind of say it's a success. One of them is the issue of path dependency, which is, I think, is yet to be addressed within the ANC. And the simple idea, as Dr. Federer in the UCT, who's an institutional economics, explains path dependence, is to say, listen, institutions, while they exist and while they run, which is to say each and every year we'll have a budget plan, each and every year we'll have IDPs. If you work in local government, each and every year the province will have a SONA, each and every year president will give a state of the nation. And these institutions, by and large, will operate. But the key issue is if you've missed giving them and actually look at their failures, what you tend to have is you have inherent problems year in, year out happening. And these problems, instead of being addressed at the core, actually get bigger and become more problematic at times. And you end up finding what Tuchman calls the march of folly, which is to say you create policies, but the very policies which you design to address key issues of unemployment actually exacerbate the problems more. And this is because I think the issue in the 2019 manifesto doesn't address this. The problem of the weak institutions of government and how they've been poorly designed over the years. And this is actually best seen in the fact that, and I made this point last week, that if you look at what South Africa is from its failures, and I have to say, pointed blank at the failures over the years of the ANC and its manifesto, especially, I would say, especially the 2019 one, is it hasn't addressed the issue of the fact that South Africa is still a country that only operates on two or three municipalities. The city of Cape Town, eThekwini, and Johannesburg. And I lump in Joburg with Tshwane and Ekurhuleni because it's actually one thing at the end of the day. And if you were to, and I think they account for about 60% of the South African economy, which basically means that you've locked out millions of other individuals out of it. And the reason I cite the years 2008 and 2019 is in the 2008 global financial crisis, which came about afterwards, the ANC did something which was actually quite remarkable. I say the ANC in government under President Mbeki. And this is what you mean by having a manifesto that speaks to it. Because if you look at the manifesto preceding 2008, they actually spoke about, I think it's on page 5, they spoke about the budget and the fact that we've actually grown the economy. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't, and I think we're all honest about that. But they're giving themselves so much scope that when the global financial crisis came in, certain interventions before it came, I think key among them was the National Credit Act. South Africa, relative to other countries, came out quite well in the fact that when you have foresight and the ability to say, listen, we have a manifesto pre-2008 which speaks about we need to really get our macroeconomic indicators correct. We need to actually build our budgets in the correct way. You are able to withstand global financial crises. But unfortunately, from 2008, Polokwane, the crisis in Zimbabwe, it would seem as though other manifestos then failed to actually put these lessons into how the ANC would interpret the political environment in South Africa. So while I understand COVID-19 was, if you look at the lives lost, was a catastrophe to the Republic, when you actually should look at it in the cold hard facts of policy, South Africa had a relative good experience coming out of a crisis of 2008. The key question we should be asking is not that COVID-19 happened, was in what state did COVID-19 find the South African economy? And if you look at the numbers preceding COVID-19, we're already slated to go into a recession. If you look at the healthcare system in South Africa preceding COVID-19, it was already problematic in how it was going to go. And here I cite the fact that we're losing specialists left, right, and center. We actually make it very hard for specialists to stay in the healthcare system. And if you look at the regional obligations of South Africa, it's become more of a spiral than anything else. And hence I call that the proof in the pudding, which kind of tells us that the 2019 manifesto, the reason why it was, I think, so hard to put together is that some of the weaknesses, which I think they did not pick up from the 2008 experience, really do kind of run through that manifesto. Now, this I hope will be more exciting for those that one is presenting to, which is the idea of saying, okay, TK, if you put all those faults together, how then should the 2024 manifesto look like? Well, look, the first big change I'd make is, look, I think you can kind of pick it up. You cannot have 7 key priorities in going forward. It's a bit cumbersome to measure. It's a bit hard to put together. So I just put a few things together, which is to say, you need to have one big macro vision. And I think David has touched on this, which is this is what's missing in the 2019 is what is the framework, the policy framework, which underpins the next manifesto going forward. Because the 2009 manifesto actually had what was termed the policy framework. And it talks about some of the documents David put together, which is the Freedom Charter, the Strategy and Tactics, RDP, and the like. And I think because the 2019 document manifesto didn't have a framework, it's open to, let's say, a lot of criticism from people such as myself, and even those within the ANC. And key among the fact that, look, you have too many priorities. You cannot have a 2024 manifesto that has 7 priorities. There needs to be hard decisions about what really needs to stick and what needs to be there. I always say you need to have 1 or 2 big ideas which really get the nation to say, oh, wow, look, at least they're thinking about bigger things. And the key thing I always put forward is we need to be getting rid of South African provinces. We don't need provinces in this day and age in South Africa. We should be reinvesting a lot of those resources into making governments, local governments actually work, getting the skills you have in provinces to actually go into local government. These are just the numbers which tell you how much of a burden provincial governments are really to South Africa. And then there is also the issue of saying, if you look at foreign direct investment, which is coming into SADC, let's say into regions of Africa, SADC, while it has done well, could actually be doing better and getting more foreign direct investment. Just looking at the comparison between 2017 and 2022. And Chair, I'm about to wrap up. And I think if you're going into a review, what needs to be in the new manifesto is an honest assessment of where has the movement gone wrong in local government, the successes, the hits, and the misses. People need to see this in black and white to take any manifesto from the ANC for 2024 seriously. And I think this needs to be extended towards provinces, because I highly doubt that as much as I'm calling for provinces to go, that's going to happen next year. And there's also an evaluation of big business and small business. And I'll explain why this is the case. And also adopted legislation and policy. Any manifesto going forward needs to explain how is it that every year in, year out, government departments give policy and legislation. Where's the revision in all this to say what are the hits and the misses? And obviously, the idea is once you've got this macro approach happening, it should feed into the meso, and all of this should then be able to give us a win-loss ratio. How I as an individual, as citizen, understand what a manifesto is supposed to be. Because at the moment, it's very hard to assess what is macro, what is meso. All I know is my micro existence as a citizen. And what my micro existence as a citizen is telling me is that this economy and the way it's being managed, or the way society is being managed by the ANC, is not working. So, and this is my last one, Chair. So I think what an ANC manifesto for 2024 should look like, in all honesty, it should not be a 2024. It should actually be an honest assessment to say this is the ANC manifesto from 1994 to 2029, which is, there have been successes, there have been failures. And we actually are learning, and we can quantify what this learning is into 5 key points, right? And I'll just quickly just make them put here, Chair, so I can just run through them quickly. One, the first part of the manifesto needs to say the 30 years story. There have been successes that cannot be denied. The fact that some of us are standing here because we had scholarship from government is a success story all by itself. Is it enough? Not really. The failures and missed opportunities. I think that should be the first layer of any manifesto going forward. Secondly, building on successes. What has really made success? The way I identified, and David partially touched on, is there is a 1994 moment that speaks about leadership and people believing leadership. There is a 2000s, which is a story of growth. And then there's a 2010s, which is a middle class story. Now, I like David, do query whether we actually have a black middle class. I think if you're living from paycheck to paycheck and your assets, the old formula, your assets versus your liabilities, if that number is uneven, you cannot have a middle class. And then there is the issue of transforming the economy. And I think one of the things the ANC does need to humble itself to understand is that it's supposed to be co-creation of mass employment. Therefore, any manifesto at the moment, which is going to come out from the ANC, stemming from this review, is going to point towards the economy. And if that's not how the basis of that manifesto, then we basically are playing games. It's not a manifesto. It's simply, it's a re-examination of dreams more than anything else. Then there is a point which I think one does harp on about, which is rural development and land reform. I think that was a bit of a game changer in 2014. The idea that you have to prioritize the rural areas of South Africa. There can be no South African story that changes South African lives without us looking at rural existence and townships. I know the Gauteng government is starting to really pick upon this, but I still think it's way behind what needs to be said. And then number 5, as I've put it, is co-laboring to build a post-2030 South Africa. And there needs to be trade-offs. Citizens need to see that government is actually feeling the pain that it's feeling. And one of the simplest things I always argue is to say, when I see politicians driving, when I see politicians having more bodyguards than they ought to, it says to me that you're no longer a leader of society. You're just simply apart from society. And I think this manifesto does need to speak to the fact that South Africa to move forward, not the ANC, the rest of the Republic to move forward, it needs to be a co-laboring. There can no longer just be one leader of society who's exempt from society, because the problems we have require co-laboring. And Chair, I know I've gone over time and I apologize for that. And yeah, that's the end of my story and my revision of the document. And I hope I haven't bored people to death, Chair.
I haven't bored people. Thank you very much, PK, for that, insightful and very provocative presentation. I would ask you to please share the presentation and the group chat, if you don't mind.
Will do,
so that people can interrogate it.
Will do, Chair.
Yeah, so that people can have enough time to interrogate it outside of this conversation. Thank you to all the speakers for laying the ground. I think they've given us a lot to think about. And this is why we want to go into depth in this review series so that we can touch on some of the issues they've raised. We can interrogate a bit further, but also we can be a bit robust in our proposal. And the only way to do that is to dissect this manifesto and get to the bones and say, how do we, assess the performance of the African National Congress, and what recommendations are we putting forward to ensure that moving forward, the manifesto speaks to the realities of the country, but it's able to also inspire hope and confidence in the government of the day. Now, without any further ado, comrades, we're going to go to the discussion. I'm going to move a round of 5 hands. I'd like to lay the ground rules once again. You have to ensure that your budget is named properly, but also you'll be required to switch on your video. When you speak, you will have about a minute to ask your question. I plead with you, comrades, no long preambles, so that we can get as many people speaking. But of course, to ensure that the questions are precise, direct, and concise, so that we can also give our panelists time to respond to them. So that is the order that we're going to do this discussion about. But before I go to note the hands, I would like to appreciate comrades that have been commenting in the chat group, even on Facebook. I'll read some of the comments. I won't read all of them because I think we can all see the comments in the chat group that are here. I'll start with the group. This person has written something, so I'll just skip that because we agreed on the ground rules. On Facebook, there is one Victor Busi, who has been really engaging with the panelists. And I'll just read one of his comments. He says, we need to look at the protective policies and laws which the apartheid regime implemented to achieve economic growth for themselves. E.g., there was an industrial incentive which encouraged factories to get set up where the state would subsidize the labor costs. 50% of the wages would be paid by the state with a tax incentive. We do not hear any of those incentives right now. So that's just some of the comments that are coming from Facebook. So now I'm going to go to voting hands. I'll start with Sipo Fetane, and then I will go to Gift Tauke. Are there any other hands, comrades, so that we can note them all at once? I need 5 hands in this first round. Any other hands, comrades? The third hand is going to be Tumelo Pitu. And then the last one is going to be Daniel. No, the fourth one is going to be Daniel. Any last hand, comrades? Okay, in the absence of the fourth hand, I will then pose a question myself and then allow the order to proceed as noted. To the panelists, I'm just wondering, as part of assessing this manifesto review, is it not important to also assess, one, the state of the organization, to say, is it well capacitated to meet the objectives it has set itself? Meaning that as we review this manifesto, can it give us a mirror reflection on the state of the party itself? But secondly, are we also able to assess the quality of cadres that are entrusted to fulfill these particular objectives? Because I fundamentally believe that you need strong cadres, you need a strong party in order to have, a capable government that is able to deliver on the manifesto promises. So that is my question, and then I'll give it over to Sipo.
Thanks, Chair. Let's welcome this thought-provoking presentations. I think, especially that of Dr. Pooe. Look, with respect, Chair, I'm not going to ask any question. If Chair allows me, I just want to make a comment. Is that allowed, Chair?
Yes, that's allowed. It's a discussion.
Thank you. Look, I think this presentation, Chair, it must be taken further to other structures of the organization, maybe the NEC, the National Elections Team or something, because some of the questions that it raises are very critical and are very, important. And most of the issues that were raised by Dr. Pooe, as I was reading the document, I really could not understand how we measured, or certain things were measured, in the midst of all these challenges. And I think this says, in moving forward, as we now preparing for the manifesto, we really need to look at the things that worked, and those that have worked, and then we leave them. We now focus on things that we did not deliver on them and have a measurable outcome, if you like. In fact, I could speak further, but I think let me just leave it at that, Chair. Thank you.
Very much, Comrade Sipo. We move on to Comrade Gift. You'll forgive me for referring to everyone as comrade. You will understand the space. So in case you're not a comrade, please don't feel offended. Okay?
Thank you, comrades. Mine is very simple, and thank you to the speakers. That was very, very insightful. Mine is simple, comrades. I know this is a review of the ANC Manifesto, but we seem to not be delving deep into the role that is played by or that is supposed to be played by the private sector. Because we know that everything that we need, or most of the things that we need to transform the state and to make the state effective, is mostly in private hands. But I haven't had much analysis on how we can actually not even force, but how we can work with the private sector to ensure that they contribute in helping us implement our manifesto. So can maybe someone that is more educated or more inclined than I am, maybe give me a brief breakdown of how the private sector can come and into this whole mix and help us implement our manifesto, because surely it's been 30 years of success and failure for the ANC, yes, but it has also been 30 years of failure, more so for the private sector, because it seems now like we are counting on the government as an instrument of fulfilling our manifesto promises. You would see Comrade Panyaza now has started in Assispan. These are things that I think is also absorbing. Most of the people that is absorbing are people that were maybe lost jobs from the private sector, people that have never even worked before. So can someone help me on that part? Thank you, Comrade.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gift, for your question.
No, thank you very much, chairperson of the session. Yes, mine is an input, it's not a question, and I want to say that what a very informative session by the three presenters. One of the things that we can use is at a branch level. I think the branch in good standing in terms of implementing the deliverables that are supposed to be done in terms of to implement the manifesto. I think the branch in good standing could play a very important role in in doing such, because at branch level, you know, you are able to see what is happening. You have a pulse on the ground. You can see what has been done, what has not been done. So I think
We're losing you. Can you please wrap up?
yes. Like I was saying, I think the branch could play a very important role in terms of manifesto implementation, where the manifesto is not implemented. The branch could play a very important role. So, and you know, in terms of other things that the manifesto should do in through different spheres of government. I think the one that is close to the branch would be the local government, which the branch in good standing could fast track the implementation of the manifesto, and could as well be the to see to it that everything that is the manifesto is talking about will be implemented. So yeah, my input is that the branch in good standing could play a very important role in implementation of the manifesto. No, thank you very much with the opportunity, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Comrade Melo, and thank you very much for your continued support on this platform. Remember, you used to be a regular on panels, and thank you very much to everyone who's consistent in supporting our initiatives. So I'll give our panelists a round to respond to these questions. But before I go there are some comments I'd like to read out. And just to say, to comrades on Facebook, if you have any question you want to post, please, you can post it in the comment section so that we can pose it to the panelists. So there's a comment which says rural development should be our first priority to bring back the hope of our people on the ground. Our people are in need of jobs to develop themselves at the rural areas. And I thought this tender should be removed. This tender system should be removed at all because our people are not satisfied. Nutrition should be given to the community and not the school. Yes, I think that is the comment. And then, Comrade TK, Dr. TK has already commented in response to that particular comment. He says, totally agree with you here, Miselo. If rural provinces could be clustered as economic sectors and look to be made a global producers of goods, you're literally bringing in monies to change lives and change working immigration patterns. This will not happen overnight, but it is a start in the reform of those regions. So with that said, comrades, I'll start with Comrade Dineo, then we'll move to Comrade David, and then we'll end off with TK.
No, thank you very much, Chair. No specific questions were addressed to me, but I think in terms of the apologies for the sounds at the back, but the first question would be around assessing the state of the organization. I definitely agree with you, and I think this was very linked to Comrade Kumelo's question about branches in good standing and assessing where we are in terms of the elections manifesto, how the implementation is happening. I think definitely the renewal of the ANC is something that is being charted already, and I think it's quite important. That's why in the presentation I mentioned also the importance of also assessing the relations within the alliance. and I think these are critical components because the alliance reflects and speaks about different components of society that come in together to come and have an achievement of the national democratic revolution. And I think this is important. The renewal of the alliance, and the renewal of course, the quality of public servants that we have, the technocrats that Comrade TK was speaking about, and all of this, I mean, then the assessment will be quite higher than that. So I definitely think that the assessing of the state of the organization is critical to this. Assessing the state of the alliance is critical. That's why nobody's limping. That's why Sanko is not limping. The SACP is not limping. Consato is not limping. But that we also get to a point where we listen to one another. I mean, the theme of the alliance review is listening to learn and learning to listen, which is lovely because this is critical component of us implementing the manifesto as we are meant to. And I mean, with regards to the role of the private sector, I am so sorry. I do not agree with, for me, giving the private sector the ultimate decision-making or implementation processes of the manifesto. For me, what is critical for us is that when we understand or we remind ourselves of our processes with regards to the national democratic revolution, then we understand that whatever policies that need to be implemented would be led by the state. And the state will then make a space that is conducive and a structured space. So when private sector comes in, whether it's a domestic private sector or it's multinational corporations, they come in with regulations that protect workers and the South African community, that enhance and build our society. For instance, if we are thinking about, organizations that have cars, I mean, Comrade Dineo was speaking about VW and BW and South Africa being the highest assembling space within the world. Once we have this space that we assembling cars and we etc., how do we ensure that we start having the manufacturing capacity in our country? Once we've won the agreement of TRIPS and we've won the TRIPS waiver and we are able to manufacture vaccines, manufacture certain medication, how do we ensure that we start creating a country that's able to do so? And I think for me, that is critical. That comes with the issues of ensuring that one, there is capacity amongst us, there's thorough discussion with communities, with our MDM structures to ensure the implementation of the organization, of the manifesto relaunch. I mean, the manifesto, and also we have an understanding of our policies that will benefit the transformation of society, the implementing of health, the implementing of all the very key pillars of the manifesto. If we don't have a state of coming together and looking, I mean, I was very interested in the comment about the tax incentive that was used in apartheid about the manufacturing companies. I think that was on Facebook or something. It was interesting because I think that there are many things that we have not thought of how we implement the manifesto, where can we learn? And this also comes back to our friends internationally and in our country, our reskilling processes. There was the incentives of that, but how Germany has looked at the implementation of things, Cuba, Venezuela. How do you look at the specific, I mean, one of the biggest challenges of COVID-19 was our care. How do we ensure care labor is prioritized within our country to ensure that we have better policies that are, of course, bring dignity to the people of our country. And I think that was, for me, a critical component. And that can only happen, yes, with the assessment of the organization, but also with a regular discussion about the implementation, not just outside of us looking at how it's entered, but also a regular assessment of it. I don't think that the assessment was far away from where it was initially. I think we just don't have quality implementation on a regular basis. So instead of having a national agenda, we're looking at things being looked at via provinces and not just assessing the full implementation. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just try to address a few issues. I probably will take a broad broad strokes in terms of my response, because I think the issues that we're discussing are they are weighty issues, and there's a lot of detail that is involved in these issues. I want to start off by saying that I have a different conception of democracy and what it means. I think for me, the different regular cycles of voting and elections and do not necessarily excite me. Yesterday I had a conversation with a young person, and I was explaining the idea of democracy just in part. That the idea of democracy is centered around empowering people to decide on their futures. And the obsession in the African continent for a good part of the last 50 years is aptly defined by Professor Zheng Weiwei, who actually says, who is a very prolific public policy scholar in China. It talks about the idea of electing and regretting. That we are so focused and more obsessed with the idea of every 5 years there must be elections, we must elect, and therefore must vote people into office. And that for us gives us an idea or a sense of being in charge of our lives and therefore our futures. But what normally occurs, as it is the experience with the rest of the continent, is that we've been in electoral cycles of election and regret. And fundamentally because of the issues I've laid out earlier on. So I do think that the structure, the idea, the structure, and the processes that define our democracy should take as their starting point the idea that we have to establish a democracy with a social content. In other words, the democracy must produce social outcomes that actually deliver a better life for all, or in economic terms, improve the quality of lives of the people. And I mean, even with the idea of how many times we've got to vote, is it after 3 years or 5 years and so on? It's quite a subjective and a relative idea. I mean, some of the countries in the continent have got 7-year cycles. We have got a 5-year cycle. In America, they've got a 4-year cycle. So there's no magic about the number 5 in our context. But that's probably a debate for another day, because the whole idea in 1994 up to now centers around the fact that if we deliver freedom and democracy, therefore the lives of the people will be better. And the question is whether have the lives of the people been better, and has it been progressing? And I mean, it depends where you stand on the matter. And as I've said, I think that on a number of things in terms of the development of public institutions, the development of the rules of engagement, we have done exceptionally well as a country. But however, where we are lacking behind and where we still have to be tested properly is whether we can improve the fortunes of the vast majority. And that's where the question lies. What I have discovered personally over the years is that as South Africans, we are quite good at diagnosing the problem. We diagnose the problem very well, but I do not think that we have progressed to a stage where we actually know how to actually resolve the problem. So if you look at how we articulate state and development as well as economic transformation, we actually do not understand how we should best transform the economy or how we should best transform society. I think for me, that's the Achilles heel for public policy in South Africa, that the part that is critical, which is about how do we transform society? Like literally, how do you transform society? That part remains elusive for ourselves. And I would suggest that we actually invest a lot of time and resources to actually address that question on how do we transform society and make it normal again. That for me is the crux of it. And if we do not get ourselves to answer that question, how do we do it? And I'm saying this because other countries that have succeeded to transform their societies, to move them from poverty to middle income countries to even actually developed countries, they have actually, among other things, answered this fundamental question: how do you actually take a society from this stage of development to a higher stage of development? That question, I think, in part, and I know the document is dated now, and I think that the past 30 years of experimentation and implementation can actually enrich that document even further. I think that question is partially answered in that 1998 document, State, Property Relations and Social Transformation. Because it talks, for instance, just to give you a practical example, it talks, for instance, about the role of competition policy in the economy. I can give you a very practical example. I mean, I know, TK, the older you get, the more you speak through practical examples than theorizing until the cows come home. The Competition Commission does exceptionally good work, but I do not think that the amount or the appetite of absorption from the work that the Competition Commission does is as high as it should be in Parliament, in the executive, as well as in the political parties. You go and look at the health market inquiry, which actually went to look at a very voluminous document of about 400 pages or so, which went in to look at the private healthcare sector and actually found the actual structural problems there and actually suggested how to actually deal with those problems. We, in our context, and because the facilitator was asking me the question about capacity of the party. In our context, we don't have that ability to translate that type of work into programs. Let me just suggest that when you talk about organizational capacity and the need to have excellent cadres to execute policy and program of the party, we necessarily do not have. So what we have for instance, in in the head office or at national level. What we have is actually political leadership. But what is lacking is actually the technical capacity to develop and monitor government programs and policies. We do not have that. It doesn't exist. You see, so if you're talking about capacity in the organization, it must be. I mean, we know this, that the head office requires much capacity to actually handle these big and complex issues and ideas that you deal with in government and in the public domain. But the national conference can only make, so if you talk about organizational capacity, the national conference can only make resolutions and political statements. National conference does not develop policy. Policy is not developed at the national conference or at a branch level and so on. Policy is developed once the party takes a position on its policy platform. It then makes certain resolutions, and then it is on the basis of those resolutions, which are actually high-level policy choices, or rather, even philosophical and ideological statements. Then to translate that into technical policy and programs in government, you require a different capacity, which, as I'm saying at the moment, does not exist in the party, and that is a major problem, right? So if you want,
to wrap up so that we can.
No, I'm wrapping up in the next 2 minutes. Then I do think that what we need to do, among other things, which is a political challenge for the ANC in particular because of its historical role, is that the first thing that the ANC should concern itself with as a national liberation movement is the unity of the African people for a cause and for a program and for a set of ideas. Once you have a disintegration at that level, then I don't see how you can succeed in your emancipatory project. Right? So I think that's the first thing that the ANC needs to look back on and say, how do we deal with this? So what we've seen is that in the past 30 years, or even in the past 50 years, to be generous, there's been a fragmentation of African unity. However, you find that we have spoken about the unitary state, the unification of South Africa from the 4 provinces, making it one country and all of that. So you have a unification of the country, but the unity of the African people themselves, the souls and the faces, the feet, the minds and the hearts are actually sort of disintegrating. That's the first thing. Then the second thing, which would be a priority for me, is the economy, as I've said. So there you will have all sorts of ideas that are in place. Some of them are not taken seriously, but I think they should be taken seriously. But we know this as a fact that all states in the world, all states establish their legitimacy on the basis of economic development. If you do not succeed at pursuing economic development, then the state and the party will actually lose legitimacy, and then the whole democratic project is likely to not to succeed. Then I think we need another separate with people like Siraj Mohammed and others. We need a separate focus just on economic transformation, right? So that we can deal with state development and the process of transforming the economy. Then the third priority for me would definitely be infrastructure, which is a younger cousin of economic transformation. I think I don't want to go into detail about that, but I think it's quite very crucial. Then the 2 last priority areas, which are more on social policy, Because in South Africa, we actually tend to think that social protection is actually social policy. It's not. Social policy is much broader and more strategic than that. So you've got education and health, which actually we have to articulate even much better. And I'm glad the NHI is coming online. We are going to get, but there's no reason why. There's no reason why Cuba succeeds at education and health when they have got a smaller country and a fewer people than South Africa has in terms of resources and in terms of positioning and all of that. We actually spend more, about 8% of our GDP goes to health, but the outcomes are actually not showing. So we've got to deal with that. But I think for me, I want to agree with TK lastly, that the narrative must be centered around a thread. That how do you articulate the dream of what we actually sought to achieve in 1912 and what apartheid has actually done to disrupt that program, right? In terms of the legacy, because the legacy of apartheid still casts a long shadow of our development trajectory. And then also articulate the progress and then the next steps in terms of how you want to position the manifesto. That's where I'm gonna end it. Yeah, but I think those will be my closing remarks. Yes.
Thank you very much, Comrade David. TK, please respond to whatever questions you'd like to. In the interest of time, we'll see after your response whether or not we can take the second round, which will lead us to your closing remarks.
Oh, no, okay, that's fine. I'll also try to be quick. Look, there's 2 points. I think on the one you asked about the issue of skills within the party and also the role of the private sector. I'll just touch on that. Look, the role of skill is, look, obviously as an outsider from the movement, I always find it peculiar that the ANC likes to say this when in reality, and look, I'm a product of my supervision, and some of the mentors I have are proper ANC people, skilled technocrats, former DDGs and the like. So I never quite get this thing when the argument is made that the ANC doesn't have skill, which then maybe brings us maybe to, I think, what the exact nature of the problem is, which is, does the ANC want the skill in the party? And does it make room for it? Because as I said, looking at it from the outside, I just make maybe the determination that I think the ANC likes speaking about skills, about having skilled personnel, but in reality, it doesn't want skilled personnel. Because skilled personnel bring about, I think, a bit of discomfort to either to the powers that be or maybe even to the rank and file. So on this one, it's not, I doubt that the ANC has skill. As I said, if you look at local government, one of the people I always cite is Dr. David Mohale, who is probably a policy wonk when it comes to local government. And the question then I'd ask is, how is he not even allowed to go up to the level within Kokta? Because that for me is just an issue of, does a party really want skilled personnel? And on this one, I think looking at history tells me maybe the ANC doesn't want, and history have been very short. We're talking post the 2000s. I don't think the ANC maybe wants such skilled personnel. Because even if you look in the private sector, people, if I'm not mistaken, Sim Shabalala and the like, they might not say they're ANC people, but I think history tells you that, no, these are people who come from the movement. So it can never be that the ANC lacks skill. The key question is, does the ANC want the skill to progress within its different stratas? And then on the issue of the private sector, look, I'll be controversial, not because I think it's a wrong point, but because I think it's a question of labor and the idea that because I always hear this point where people cite countries such as China and everything else, forgetting that if you look at the private sector, it is very robust, and to the point where the issue of labor rights is not as, how do I put it, as cozy as South Africa is. Look, if you look at what the nature of our problem is, and here I'll just cite what President Mbeki said, that sometimes I think the ANC has painted itself into a bit of a wall where it says that it protects everything that is labor, but it's actually protecting a shrinking population of people that are employed. If truth be told, if the ANC really did want to, and I have to emphasize this, as I said, I'm being controversial. If for me, the ANC really wanted to address the issue of unemployment, I think it would say, let's look at everything under the sun, even if this means relooking at our relationship with labor. Because history shows us, and again, I always like quoting countries that we can at least have some level of proximity to, because I think places like Cuba, while nice, they're not comparable. South Africa, by its very nature, from its colonial time, has been set up as a country of mass. We are an international country. We are all about exporting. So I think we should look at comparable countries such as us. Our economy is set up to take things outside. And even when you manufacture it, we're going to need an outside base. And if that then is the case, I'd say to the ANC is, look, if Labour is holding South Africa back, we have to be very honest and say, listen, perhaps we need to relook at things. For instance, I know people look at what's happening in the Eastern Cape with the automotive industry. Well, you'd know that in 2030, the European Union and many Western countries are saying, listen, we don't want the carbon engine anymore. We don't want the engine. Where does that leave places like the Eastern Cape, where the Mercedes plants are happening? So that basically means we're going to need to relook at our whole conceptualization of what Labour looks like. And if people do read my the presentation I sent on points 3 and 5, or towards framing a new what I term is a new manifesto, I make the point that you cannot ignore the private sector any longer. And going back to what President Thabo Mbeki said 2 months ago, he said, listen, government loves speaking about policies all day long, but the private sector actually does the job at the end of the day. It's a point which I think people haven't picked up on. What he said is the private sector during COVID came to an understanding, and even he was shocked that, listen, we need to play an active part in South Africa's revitalization and South Africa going forward. He said he didn't get that grace as a president. So if the South African private sector, which has suffered from, they've seen that the continent is not as green as I think it is, that the home base is where things are happening. If I think the private sector, which is more humble, and the South African government and the ANC actually were to put their hands together and say, listen, which policies stop the mass citizenry of our population who are unemployed from actually gaining there? Not what's best for Labour or its Labour partners, but what's best for people that are unemployed. I think if that conversation was real, I think we could see change in the next 5 years and less, because the private sector is sitting on money. But even I, as an investor, would not want to put in money if I'm going to be dictated to how this money is going to be used. Does that mean I don't believe in labor rights? I think if you don't believe in labor rights in this day and age, there's something which is not going to work with you. But we shouldn't equate labor rights with labors and unions. I think we just need to maybe separate the two. And that's what I say about the private sector, that South Africa is not going anywhere if we don't have a private sector. Our state already it's hamstrung. You look at the numbers from Treasury. Even if you go read the DTIC's industrialization, its vision, what it wants to do with industrialization, it's premised on the fact that we need to have a private sector. So on this one, Chair, as I said, I will be controversial, but I think we need to really get to a point where we need to divorce feelings and emotions and history, which includes the labor movements in South Africa, outside of this debate, and say the bigger problem is the unemployed. How do we get them into the room? And if that means divorcing even from labor, I think the ANC should be strong enough as and I say quote unquote, a leader of society, to say put society first, not your historical attachments.
Thank you very much, PK, for that, and all the panelists. I'll open up the last round. I'm sorry, comrades, we might have to end a little bit later than we thought, because we're supposed to end at 2. But because there were hands raised before, just note those hands, and then we'll give our panelists closing remarks so that at least we can end with around 10:02. I'll start with Nape. Your hand was up in the last round. Then I'll go to Dr. Pinagazi. Is there any other hand, comrades? Welcome. I know you. Going once. Going twice.
Okay. Yeah.
To those
Hello?
who are asking
Hello?
questions, please be.
Hello?
Yeah. Those who are asking questions, please be concise. Straight to the point. Nothing. Go ahead.
Yeah. I needed to check because I already placed my question on the chat. I needed to check if because I heard that we're going to have it's 5 days program. So I was checking if is it going to be breaking down as per, maybe let's say per department, where we're going to discuss each day we're going to discuss the department each, because I think that would be much easier for us to deal with every issues. As I was listening to TK Pooe, I think also for us it will be helpful because we will be able to reach some point where we'll be able to resolve some of the issues that we are unable to reach as an organization. So that was my take, and I just needed to check that if we are going to break, we're going to break each issue is going to be dealt with on its own, unlike dealing with issues randomly, because if we deal with issues randomly, we're not going to be able to reach anything. Like we're not going to have a resolve on these policy issues that we are trying to fix. Yeah, thank you. That was my take.
Thank you very much, Comrade Napi. Maybe you joined this this a bit late, but I did make the point in the preface that we are going to have a series of the review, which is going to focus on the thematic areas of the priorities, 7 priorities that have been identified. So in short, we are going to do exactly what you are asking. Just stay tuned to our social media pages so that you can get an update on the next conversation that will happen and what that will be having, which is happening next Sunday. Welcome.
Yes, thanks a lot, Comrade Chair, for the opportunity. I also do not have a question, but I have a few remarks to make. I've listened very carefully to the presentations by the 3 presenters. I'm quite impressed actually by all their presentations, especially Dr. Pooe's presentation. But there's one thing that I've noticed in the movement. I think we are just kicking the can down the road here, comrades. There is an elephant in the room that no one is prepared to address. This elephant in the room is the poor performance of our movement in all spheres. If you take, you wanted to talk about 2010 to now, use that at least, poor performance and poor consequence management for that performance. So people know that I can perform as poorly as I like. There will be no consequences. Perceptions count, comrades, because people out there realize that in government, you can perform as poorly as you like. There will be no consequences for you. And Comrade Dineo touched on very important aspect. She touched on corruption, that we need to deal with corruption. But perception out there is that the ANC is tolerant to corruption, and we won't go anywhere if we do that. And the other major issue is that we do not enforce any discipline in terms of failing to meet the targets. Someone talked about Professor Weiwei. He raised an issue in his last lecture at the School of Government that in China they had a target of quadrupling their economy from 1980 to 2000, but they did that in 1995. What about our NDP? How far have we gone there? Whose heads have rolled because of poor performance and non-delivery on the NDP? You and the Comrade David also raised the issue of the RDP. We have many areas within the RDP that we have not achieved. I know we have achieved quite a lot, but taking everything into totality, the record is not very good. The last point, Chair, on professionalization, Comrade David talked about professionalization of the public sector. Now, my question is, how does this happen in an environment where there is a constant and consistent political interference in the work of senior and very low public servants? This is not unknown to those in the apex of the movement and the state. It is known, but it's tolerated. This is what is taking us back in terms of leapfrogging this economy. We are now number 3 in terms of size in Africa, in the economic size in Africa, not because Egypt and Nigeria have been performing wonderfully, because our performance have been very disappointing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for those inputs, Matrota. Welcome. Please unmute.
All
We
right,
asking
no,
me? Oh, sorry.
all right. Yeah, thank you, comrades. And yeah, mine is, it's a question basically, and it's directed to all the panelists. Would you agree that perhaps maybe what Dr. Pooe mentioned earlier on when he was talking about the disjuncture, that is there with the manifestos, that it could be attributed to lack of alignment, for a lack of a better word, with our existing policy documents. I mean, if you look at what Dr. Pooe mentioned earlier on around the rural development, if you check one of our documents, Ready to Govern, which was there already in 1992, there in the document, we were already talking about rural development as early as 1992. And to this day, we're still talking about rural development. That perhaps maybe what we might need to do in this situation is for us maybe to even come up with a repository of those policy documents, whether you are ready to govern document, your RDP, and any other document. And as we review these manifestos, that we also make sure that they align with all these documents that we put together. Because yes, we for as long as we don't align with all these documents, we'll forever have this disjuncture that Dr. Pooe talked about. So yeah, basically, I think if perhaps maybe the panelists can also, comment on whether this disjuncture is it not as a result of lack of alignment, between our policy documents and the process of developing these manifestos. Thanks. Back to you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much for those questions. I'll give it back to our panelists to give us their 2 minutes closing remarks as they respond to these questions, because the aim was to at least end at 10 past, but I think we'll extend it to 1:15. I'll just read out some of the questions on Facebook. Some of them are comments. Nkolisi Nyaka says, I think we really need to look at our economic policies from the RDP, GEAR, the NDP, and radical economic transformation. Do they have any changes in job creation, improve conditions of our community? The answer is not right impact. We are now facing escalating job losses, impoverished and unfair labor practices. We need to look at our education system, where we need to encourage FET colleges and comprehensive schools for skills growth. And then Vosi again makes the point that white men who came from the military conscription were automatically placed in management position across state-owned enterprises and the retail sector. This explains the military hierarchy and attitudes in private sector. I guess it's responding to the question of the role of the private sector. So it's just describing some of the characters and what informs those characters of the South African private sector. So I'll give it to back to my panelists. I'll start with Dr. Pooe, then we'll have Comrade Dineo, and then Comrade David will close for us. Can we please just keep it short, panelists, because we're really running out of time.
All right, no, I'll be short. On the issue of policy, look, I think the last comments they made about revisiting ANC policies, especially economic policy is a must. I'll close off with this. I've always made this point, and I think I made it when the NDP came out, that the NDP was never going to work because the NDP was never a policy. And I found it a bit odd that the ANC, especially post-2019, has actually harped on about the NDP. Look, policy is very precise and to the point. I think one of your colleagues made the point of looking at the Chinese Communist Party. When they make a policy, the numbers that go into that are to the point. They know what is failure and what is success. So I think my parting shot would be, I think there is a need to revisit all ANC policies as it regards economic policies. I know people cite the document Ready to Govern. One of the scholars I work with, he said, look, it should actually be titled Ready Not to Govern, because a lot of what's in there has not really manifested. In this regard, I would go back to the points I made that I think better but fewer. The ANC really does need to limit its policy scope to just three things: rural development, economic development, and getting an education system and that allows us to be more continental. By continental, I mean allows us to make products in South Africa to get to the continent. If it's not that, I don't know what you're doing as a governing party, because the biggest crisis of the day is unemployment. And I say this because I come from the Vaal, and when the Vaal used to be the heartland of industrialization, going back home, it's heartache, because you know the nature of South Africa's unemployment requires that we're going to need mass manufacturing. And for that to occur, you need, to the point, calculated policy. And I think if you speak of anything outside that, I think you're speaking about a luxury the ANC really doesn't have, because society will move and is moving past the ANC. The question is, the ANC ready to reorientate itself to understand where society is? Because if it's not, it'll move into something. It might not be great, but it'll be something because the ANC refuses to move in that same direction. And I think policy needs to be led by people who understand it. And yeah, and if that's not the case, we're going to be further behind. And thank you for this opportunity. Let me not take too much of a time change.
Thank you so much, TK, for your input and your time. Dineo.
No, thank you, Chair. So my contribution is, I think I fully agree with I fully agree that the economic policy should be, of course, regularly discussed and changed, and with proper consultation of all, including labor. And I just wanted to mention something that was quite interesting, and I'll try and mention this as quickly as possible. But when SACTU, the Clothing and Textile Workers Union, was speaking about industrial policy in preparation of Chinese manufacturing, in preparation of manufacturing that was coming from outside of the country, the one thing that they did is that they put an industrial policy that not only protected labor, but ensured that industries exist. I think what is important about having labor in the table is that labor starts having discussions that not only protects the laborers, but also protects industries. Remember, when labor it's important that there must be a job for labor to be active. So we are saying that labor should definitely be part of the discussions of economic policy, economic increasing in economic strength as well. I'm telling you that right now, ShopRite in itself, in growing in different countries, has had labor being critical in those prospects of having discussions, how to formalize things. What needs to happen in our country is that we take seriously the contribution of labor in whatever we do. And also lastly, just to stop things, is that we must always have a process of ensuring that people are put before profit. And yes, we want to increase as a country, but any country that does not include or have people as primary beneficiaries of any policy, and that we undermine the resource that comes from people to implement anything that we need, will have a problem. And I think the ANC government and ANC policies and the pillars as suggested in 2019, with proper consultation, with inclusion of the Reconfigured Alliance, with inclusion of the MD ODM in its entirety will be able to be impactful if those discussions still continue moving on to 2024, with reliance on people, reliance on putting people before profits, reliance of even structuring how investment comes into our country with clear plans that understand our national democratic revolution and society that we envisage to live in. Because that's the only way we can have a developmental state that we want and that we encourage to have. That's the only way we'll change the relations to the means of production that exist within society. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Dineo, for your inputs.
Yeah, my last parting shot is that the first thing I would say is that I think what we are all saying as a panel is that the manifesto needs to be much clearer. There needs to be greater clarity in the manifesto. And it needs to have a clear narrative, and it needs to have clear interventions and clear targets that are quantifiable and time-bound. I think that's the first proposal that we're making, right? The second thing that, and just by the way, TK, my sense of comparison. The sense of comparison is not that of generalization and straitjacket. My sense of comparison is that you go to each country, province, region, town, city, you pick up the best practice, and you sort of bring it home and see how it can be adapted to your own context. So that's my sense of comparison, by the way. So I still do insist that we can't have Cuba succeeding in health and education, and we don't. The third point I want to make is that the issue here is about the fact that the greatest area where there is a greatest need for development, for progress, and which is the economy, we have not seen a lot of progress in. And I think that the manifesto, the ANC and government needs to invest a lot of time and resources to actually resolve that. Because as I'm saying, the people are not fighting for the ideas in our heads. People just want, better quality of life, improving their lives, and so on, and actually living their lives and actually self-realizing their potential. That's all that is required. As I was saying, if we take examples, what remains as a vision, that of building a national, democratic, non-sexist, non-racial, prosperous society, is what in China or in Singapore you would regard as the mainstay of public policy. So in China, you would find that they speak about the four comprehensives, and the 3 represents. And those will cut across over a period of 50 years or even 100 years. They don't change, they remain, because you cannot change policy focus and the vision as if you have attained it. But that's the point, So for as long as you define it as an existing and a continuing problem, then you've got to have it as a pillar or as a focus of your policy intervention and your government program. But if you don't do that, it means that you're actually abandoning policy. It means you are, just to create a new word or concept, it means you are a policy. So to borrow from apolitical. So it means you are a policy because it means that you You have defined a problem, but we are yet to resolve it, but you are abandoning the resolution of the problem. So in my view, if you do not radically transform the economy, which in our case would mean industrialization, manufacturing, specific manufacturing, given the change in technology, as well as all the related factors that have to do with transforming the economy. If you do not deal with that, then you cannot create value, you cannot grow the economy, you cannot get the jobs, then you cannot have a better quality of life for the people. There's no way that the economy, the lives of the people can actually change and improve without the economy actually transforming and growing and becoming more diverse in terms of the products and the services that it provides. And lastly, we do have a market, and that market, as TK said, is actually here in the African continent. Because without articulating the South African vision and the South African dream within the context of Pan-African unity, we cannot succeed. You can go to Europe, you can go to Asia, you can go anywhere. There is no way that you can have one thriving economy in a region that is actually falling behind. So that becomes my point of emphasis. And I'm clear about this. If you do not put effort on how, I was listening, just one last bit. I was listening to the debate about political coalitions. And I don't hear something that actually makes other countries succeed at their economic development processes. Something that is referred to as economic governance coalitions. The economic governance coalitions is what we need more alongside political coalitions, because as you have seen, the economic questions and imperatives were somewhat not emphasized or left out in the CODESA process that we've had 30 years ago. And this time around, when you go to political coalitions, you cannot leave out economic governance coalitions, because that's where, in the paper of 1998 that I keep on going back to, that's where we talk about how the state actually intervenes in the economy and makes sure that it remains autonomous, and yet it remains embedded within the various sectors without capture, of course. Thanks.
Very much, Comrade David. You see, the problem is that you have a lot to dish out. It's just unfortunate that we're working within a limited time. I would first and foremost like to apologize for ending this late, but I thought this discussion, this ground laying for the series that we want to have for the manifesto review is quite important. And I would really like to appreciate all of you for joining the space, including the people that joined us on Facebook. I'd like to thank our panelists for really giving us time and the insightful inputs that they've given. I think in terms of agenda setting, they have done a sterling job. And it means that they have set the bar very high, that our next dialogues in this series have to ensure that it meets that standard or it goes above it, nothing below. Lastly, I would like to say, comrades, you can find this particular record of this discussion on our Facebook page. You can also find it on our YouTube page. We're going to post it on our YouTube page, and you can share it with other comrades. And I was just thinking to myself as we were discussing that, in fact, we are responding to a fundamental rallying call in the foreword of the manifesto review, which is the last paragraph of the foreword, which says, we therefore invite you to be part of this journey of review, of seeking answers to the questions we face, and to work together to build a better South Africa. We have started that particular journey as the OR Tambo School of Leadership with yourselves as aides. And indeed, Comrade TK, we want to be a think tank for the African National Congress in the country. And that's why we're very specific in the people that we choose to contribute to the dialogues. And I would like to invite comrades to also write as well in this review process. So that at the end of the day, we can have a coalition of thoughts that are coming out across sectors through these dialogues, through writing, so that when we go drafting the new manifesto, we are able to make sure that it is qualitatively better than what we have done in the past. Follow us on our social media pages to get more updates about the upcoming dialogues. As I said, that this particular review series is a part of public dialogues that we'll be hosting in different platforms, in different formats. Those of you who are aware that we're in fact supposed to have a public lecture by Dr. Ivo Mandaza assessing the state of democracy in the SADC region, a reflection on the national elections of Zimbabwe, which was postponed. We will be announcing the new date very soon of this particular public lecture. So be on the lookout for updates on the projects and the dialogues that we'll be having. But you must also visit our website to enroll for our courses, particularly Introduction to Political Studies, because it is a very important course that has 4 critical modules, which are the history of South Africa and the ANC, building the ANC organization, government, as well as economic development. So some dialogues that we're having are giving meaning to those particular courses that are there. So we invite you to go and enroll for those particular courses. Once again, thank you very much. My name is Stephen Zomparen. I am the Applications and Communications Manager at the OR Campus School of Leadership. I will see you next week and have yourselves a wonderful week. Thank you very much, comrades.